Azure Logic Apps. Kinda sounds like function apps, right? Well, they are related. You can use an Azure Logic app to execute a pipeline of tasks. Where an Azure function is one step of a process, a Logic app orchestrates the complete process. And just like functions, Logic apps have triggers, which can be based on a schedule or on something that happens, like a new event from Azure Event Grid or a new message in a queue. The Logic app process consists out of API calls, which you use connectors for. There are many built-in connectors that allow you to make calls to things like Microsoft 365, Twitter, SendGrid, and more. And you can also create your own APIs to call and even use Azure Functions as APIs. Also, like Azure Functions, Logic apps can run serverless in what is called consumption mode, or you can run them in a mode that you pay for all month. A typical Logic app works like this. It is triggered by something, which can be a timer or something like a new row in a SQL database or a message in a service bus. Then Logic apps can take the data from the trigger, like from a message, and evaluate it. Next, the Logic app calls a connector to do something, like call an API or execute another Logic app or send an email. You can make a long list of steps, conditions, and loops that orchestrate a complete process. So let's see that in action. We'll create an Azure Logic app in the Azure portal. And by the way, you can also use the Azure Command Line Interface or CLI or plugins in programs like Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code to create Azure services. So you don't need to use the Azure portal per se. All right, here we go. As with most services, I'll start by selecting a resource group. Also, when you create a new service, you can create it in a new resource group, which you can create right here. And now I'll give the Logic app a name. All right. Just like Azure Functions, I can publish this Logic app into a Docker container to use anywhere, even outside of Azure. Let's see what else. The plan it runs on. I want to use the consumption plan, which is the serverless plan. This scales automatically. All right, that's it. Let's create the Logic app and I'll skip ahead. Here it is, our brand new beautiful Logic app. To get started, I need to go to the Logic App Designer. In here, I can start with one of the many templates. All of these have steps in them for a certain scenario. I like to start with a blank template. Here we go. Every Logic app starts with a trigger. I want to start with something from Azure Blob Storage, the connector here. It has one trigger and a lot more actions, as we'll see in a minute. This trigger will start the Logic app when a blob is added or changed. So when I upload an image to my blob container. And I have already created a connection to my Azure Storage account, which I select here. This connector will prompt you to create a connection to services like Azure Storage. And I want to use the images container to monitor. Now, this is a so-called pull connector, so it will check in intervals if there is anything new in my blob container, and in this case, it will do so every 3 seconds. Okay, cool. Let's add a new step. And again, I want to use Azure Blob Storage. See, there are many actions in this connector. I want to use get blob content as I want to get the actual image, so the data from the blob, not just the name and properties. To do so, I will give in this dynamic content. Isn't that cool? This is what comes out of the trigger action before. So the path of the blob, which includes its name. Okay. Let's add another step. Now I'll choose from Microsoft 365 Outlook. I can do a lot with this connector, almost anything that you can think about. And I want to send an email. Again, I'm already connected with my Microsoft 365 account, and you will be prompted to do so as well. All right, let's send an email. First, I'll type a text for the email body, something like this. And next, I need a subject for the email. Okay. And I'll send it to myself, to barry@improvingbarry.com. Okay, looks good. Now for the attachment. I'll add a new parameter, and that is attachments. Okay, let's fill in the details. I can get the file content, so the actual blob file itself, from the previous step, like this. Isn't that cool? And I can get the name from the initial step. This returns a list of names, but I indicated that I only wanted one blob to be returned, so this should work. Okay, I'll save it, and that's it. Now I need to run it. It will now check the blob container for new blobs. Remember that ASP.NET app that uploads images to blob storage? Well, that's this one, and I've uploaded it to App Service. Let's use it. I'll pick this image. Okay, and upload. Let's see if that works in the portal. Refresh, and yep, there is the image in blob storage. Now check the Logic app. And yeah, this worked as well. If something went wrong, it would show error signs here, and I could investigate the error. Now for the result. I should have a new email. And yep, here it is, with an attachment. And it is the image. Isn't that just magical and so simple to click together? This used to take weeks of coding to accomplish, especially if you want it to be robust and redundant, secure and performant, and now I can just click it together within minutes.